let me move on now specifically to the paper. In the spirit of accreditation, or at least the spirit of accreditation in the Northwest, where we have a great deal of equanimity and where we don't rank and where we look for the positive as well as, I never think about weaknesses. In the Northwest, you'll come to know this at Portland State, I always think about, Bill Zumet is already smiling, I think about problematic areas of concern. No one has weaknesses. They laugh. They say that this is the Berkeleyite in me coming out. I'm never thinking about weaknesses, but problematic areas. So I've commented on Task Force 1 in terms of two categories. One is commendations, and two are recommendations, suggestions. I didn't know how else to organize this. I sat up for nights saying, what does she want? She said, oh, you know. Okay, so.
Not very helpful, huh?
My 30-year-old friend who said, oh, you know. Okay, so here are the commendations. First, that the paper raises significant normative and empirical questions. And I would emphasize here normative. They're really incredibly normative, important questions that we as an academic community, as an international academic community, I think have to raise. Second, and here I was putting on my objective hats, okay? The paper provided cogent, contextual information to understand the issues overall, and this was followed by specific country descriptions. Third commendation is that the paper identified concerns and problems associated with the brain drain dilemma, and also the lack of incentives or security, if you will, for doctoral students to go abroad and to complete what could be a long duration of their graduate studies. Okay, recommendations, which simply means suggestions for further food for thought. And in quality assurance, and again, keep in mind this is the perspective I'm looking at, it's very much in a way like public policy. I don't know if Bill would agree here. But the better the problem can be defined, ultimately, the more successful or effective the outcome. So one of my observations is this. First, that there was a need for greater specificity to what the actual policies and practices would need to be developed. What actual policies and practices would need to be developed to create that more equitable distribution of intellectual capital globally. So again, I'll repeat it. I know I don't have PowerPoint here. There was a need, I saw, for greater specificity as to what the actual policies and practices should be that would get to the end goal. 2, there was a need to address how those policies would relate, or if they would relate, to the goals of a university per se. That comes back to my initial comment that doctoral education does not exist in a vacuum, doesn't exist in a void. It exists within the structure of an institution. Third observation, who would actually be responsible for ensuring that those policies and practices were implemented? Who would be responsible? Fourth area that needed to be addressed, which Hocha, I thought in his comments, spoke to very eloquently. What is the capacity? What is the infrastructure of the university to accomplish the very laudable goals that were articulated in Task Force 1's paper? What is the capacity of any university or of a university system to accomplish the goals? Fifth, the need would be to address how the university would determine its success. What benchmarks would it use? What benchmarks might an entire university system within a country use to say that, in fact, the desired outcomes were achieved? And lastly, when I was thinking about this, and I was trying to put myself either in one of my former universities or in universities in certain countries that I'm familiar with, I came up with a notion that there could be, and I say this deliberatively, not an easy, but perhaps a very practical solution. So I'll just put it out there for conversation. And that was, what if a quality assurance agency, I'm going to look at one of my colleagues who would be directly affected by this at Portland State University. What if a quality assurance agency were to mandate in one of its standards for accreditation that indeed, under a standard that addresses graduate education and educational programs, that there had to be policies and practices in place that would bring about a more equitable distribution of intellectual capital globally. And then with that criterion, she says, in the hope that the Northwest might ever do something like this, it would then be incumbent on the university per se to provide evidence and to demonstrate how you were meeting that standard for accreditation. I say this because for those of you who know me well, I'm always thinking about how indeed quality assurance agencies like my own can begin to address some of the more global issues that demand our attention as an academic community. So I leave you with those comments, and I thank you for your time.